says in the reading today that everything that he once thought was really valuable, he doesn't really consider to be that valuable. And things that he thought were not valuable, now he considers to be supremely important. And if you look at the life of St. Paul, that makes a lot of sense. Remember, St. Paul was originally called Saul, and he was a Pharisee, and he made it his life's objective to persecute the Christians. He looked at Christianity as some sort of corrupt form of Judaism. He was very well educated. He was taught by a very prominent teacher named Gamaliel. And St. Paul was responsible for the death of the first deacon, St. Stephen. And he wasn't trying to be a bad person. He thought he was defending the faith. This is how he revealed his zeal for God, was by persecuting Christians. And then he has this incredible encounter with the risen Lord. He sees Jesus in a vision. Jesus says, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" St. Paul gets knocked off his high horse, and then everything changes. This religion that he hated so much, now he loves it, and he becomes a part of it, and becomes a leader in it. Jesus, whom he thought was a false prophet, is now the object of his worship. Everything has changed for St. Paul. The things that he hates, he now loves and even worships. We can see what he's saying here. Everything that I once thought was bad is I now consider to be incredibly important and good. Then he goes on and he talks about the law. What did he used to do? He used to fixate on all the little details of the law. And now that's changed, because now that Jesus is in the picture, now that the incarnate Lord is in the picture, you have to reinterpret every single verse of the Old Testament. Not contradict it, not delete it, but certainly reinterpret it. So St. Paul, after he has his conversion, people skip over this part. He doesn't just go out and start preaching immediately. He actually isolates himself. He goes to Arabia, which is probably a reference to Mount Sinai. He does a retreat. And understandably, because he has to completely rethink his entire life and his entire religion and his entire faith. If he's going to follow Jesus Christ, everything has to change. From who his friends are, to his beliefs and his mentality, to his habits. St. Paul was willing to let that transformation happen. He was willing to let Jesus change him from Saul to Paul, even though it meant changing everything. And what does he get from that? He talks in this reading about something else where his perspective has changed from hating it a lot to actually seeing some value in it. And that is death. Death, I think Saul had the same attitude towards death that is most natural for a human being. Right? Death is evil. Death is bad. We're terrified of it. It's scary. And certainly we should, in some ways, feel that way towards death. But St. Paul suddenly realizes, wait a minute, there's some meaning here in death. Death is my passageway to Jesus Christ. I want salvation because Jesus died for me. And so even death can be somehow meaningful if it's infused, if it's transformed by the love of Jesus Christ. Now, that is not something to be taken lightly, because death is the worst possible thing. And if Jesus has conquered death and made death meaningful, then he can conquer anything. Any trial in your life, any vice, any anxiety, anything that you're worried about. If Jesus conquered death, he can conquer that as well. It's kind of like if you go up to a weightlifter and you ask him, how much can you bench press? And he tells you, I can bench press 300 pounds. That's not me, by the way. And then you say, okay, that's cool, but can you bench press 100 pounds? Of course. course he can do, if he can do 300, he can do 100, right? That's how weight works. It's the same way with death. If Jesus conquered death, death is the worst possible thing. So he can conquer everything else. He has conquered everything else. If Jesus can bench press 300 pounds, he can certainly bench press 300. That's what I'm trying to say. All right? Now you might think death is not the worst thing. Maybe the devil is the worst thing. And that's actually not true. The devil is only powerful because he has death in his corner. He scares us with death. He tries to bring us to death. Spiritual death and physical death. Usually he threatens us with physical death to try to get us to experience spiritual death. But if death is conquered, what power does the devil have? He has no weapons, no power, and no influence. Death is the true enemy. And Jesus Christ has transformed that. And that's what St. Paul is rejoicing over. That even death, this thing that we're all terrified of, this thing that gives the devil his power, this thing that seems to win in the end for all of us, even death is powerless. Even death is transformed by the grace and power of God. What else does Jesus want to transform in your life? What are the many different manifestations of death? The vices, the anxieties, the fears. Give them to the Lord, surrender them to him, and let him transform them. But remember this fact, is that when we surrender our life to Christ, we have to be like St. Paul, and we have to let him change us. We have to let him change the way that we live and the way that we think. We have to let him change what we think is valuable and not valuable. We have to let Jesus Christ get the final say in everything in our life. And that's what allows him to transform us. And what is the result? What is the benefit we get by letting Jesus have complete authority over our life? We share in Jesus' victory over death. And if by the grace of Christ we can conquer death, we can conquer